Phoenix Police Chief Jerry Williams has fired 3 police officers, including one who pointed a gun at a black family in a shoplifting case that gained national attention. Here to talk about the firings and their impact on local law enforcement, we welcome attorney Anthony Ramirez from Warnock McKinley Law. He's a former police officer who now represents clients in police abuse cases. Good to see you again. Thanks for
Good to see you again. Thank you for having me here.
How unusual for a police officer to be fired?
It's very unusual. You know, there are thousands of contacts made by police officers every day, and the vast majority of them, in fact, you know, I would venture to say 99% of them end very well. So it is very unusual for this to happen.
The first officer was the one who threatened to shoot a family suspected of shoplifting. Surprised that he's been fired?
I think Chief Williams had a very difficult task on her hands to balance her obligation and perception to the officers as well as to the public. I don't think it's surprising given the outrage that the public expressed during the last few months. So no, I'm not surprised that it happened.
Discipline board, though, recommended suspension. The chief said it's not sufficient to reverse the adverse effects of the actions, of this officer's actions, on our department and our community. Does that make sense?
It does. And, you know, the Disciplinary Review Board makes a suggestion to the chief. In this city, the chief of police, the decision rests with her as to whether, you know, what action she wants to take. So, you know, for her to take that, I think she was taking the public sentiments very, very seriously. You know, I think the Disciplinary Review Board, you know, they did look at the entire situation, probably had a lot more information than we had out in the public, and made their recommendations, you know, but the rest with the chief.
Yeah, and the board also recommended suspension for another officer, Clinton David Swick. These regarded Facebook posts. The national group had shown some of these Facebook posts from a variety of officers around the country, including Phoenix. Violent responses were in some of these posts toward minorities, toward crime suspects, these sorts of things. We don't know the true nature of these Facebook posts, but this is a firing over this. Again, seems somewhat surprising.
You know, obviously, on one side, you hear advocates of, you know, First Amendment rights of freedom of speech. But you have to remember that a police officer, you know, when they put the badge on, they're held to a higher standard. And I think that that's what Chief Williams was doing here, was expressing that that officer being held to a higher standard.
And again, as with the previous officer, the board recommended suspension. What does it do for morale in the department, for the average cop on the beat, when the board says suspension and she says, these people are terminated?
I think it creates a hill to climb for the chief. You know, obviously the rank and file officers, you know, are beholden to the DPR when they are called before it, if they ever are. And, you know, for the chief to take it upon herself to make a different recommendation other than what was recommended to her is challenging. I wouldn't want to be in her shoes. But, you know, given the public sentiment, I wouldn't argue with the call.
Yeah, the third officer was Daniel B. Jones, fired after an internal affairs probe. We may never know what the internal affairs probe was all about, will it?
You may never know.
Yeah, but enough to be fired. The chief said, this is a quote from the chief, "I expect my officers to be respectful, to be professional, to be courteous, and that is not what happened in these cases." Again, reason enough for termination.
I think the chief of police had a very difficult decision to make. I think that given the climate of what's been taking place, you know, over the last year, that the chief is doing the right thing. I think she is doing what she said she was going to do, which is holding her officers accountable and holding her department to a higher standard. And I think that's the right thing to do.
Are there officers who, when they see this, we know the reaction from some is not going to be good, but are there other officers who say, all right, at least she means business, and we know it?
I think they might. You know, the reality of it is that they are held to a higher standard, and I think most police officers do what they're supposed to do. So when they do see discipline handed down to the minority, vast minority of officers that make a mistake, I think, you know, they might not voice that to their line officers, but right. I think deep down they know that it was the right decision.
And those who are tempted to maybe overstep the bounds might perhaps think twice?
Sure.
Last question. Message to the community. What is it?
I think that the message to the community is that the Phoenix Police Department is taking their concerns seriously and doing what they need to do to hold themselves to a higher standard, which I think is a step in the right direction.
All right. Good information. Former police officer Anthony Ramirez, now an attorney. Good to have you here.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
And later on Arizona Horizon.